Hey guys, welcome to another week of Lever Open Source Office Hours. Here at Lever with Zeus, and I'm Nate. Pavel was just telling us that he's been working on content editable support. So why don't you kind of kick off what you've done so far, Pavel?
Yep. So there is a first working implementation that I think is kind of work already.
Mm-hmm.
Let me share the screen with you. Uh, okay, so can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, so this part, this is kind of like one of our new designs for our website, and the part of it is like one of the things that we want to do is to have an actually to be able to edit the data on it, to have like administrators that can just enter the website and just enter the information on it directly. Uh, well, what I used to try to make the content editable actually working is well, the main plugin is the Medium editor. It's a clone of the Medium editor, obviously. Uh, and they did a pretty good job with it, like awesome job. It's very convenient to use.
Nice.
Uh, and like one thing that wasn't enough to make it feel good is when one person is selecting something or like in some place, you want to update it in such a way that you keep the selection, so like you don't lose the selection when the
Right.
content of this thing is being updated. So
Right.
like in order to do this, like I use another library which does the cursor, which can restore the position of the cursor or of the selection that you have currently on the page. So if I start typing something here, the selection is there, and like I can delete something, like this thing. Uh, so now you can, for example, like select something, make it a header, then hello world,
Nice.
hello again. Make it again, like header.
Are you storing the data?
Huh?
What's your data structure look like? Like, how are you storing this?
So this is just text. So it's a full content. It's an HTML content. It's not a rich text like a rich type of the OT. It's
Mhm.
just a string.
Got it.
But nevertheless, I think it works pretty good, at least with two people. I don't know how it's going to perform when there are lots of people changing the same stuff.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's technically not ideal, but it would probably work in practice.
yeah.
There's some problems like if you were to bold something and I were to italic something, and there's various OT conditions you might get into that are valid OT operations, but they're not valid HTML.
Mhm.
Or you might like delete a tag on one end, but not the other end. Like it could happen, but
Mhm.
you could probably also just uh, do whatever you're doing, and then I imagine the Medium editor might even do this, but you could probably just periodically kind of like go through and like make your invalid HTML fragments
Uh-huh.
into valid HTML by like removing that like half tag that doesn't make sense anymore or something, like that.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
And the Medium editor might even go ahead and do that because I've never looked at the code, but the uh, basically the implementation of content editable in every browser is like vastly different, and the way they work is really crazy. So a lot of times they end up basically rewriting the HTML structure constantly to make them
Mhm.
consistent on different browsers. Um, and that might be something you should double check. I don't know if you've looked into it yet, but does the Medium editor make the same HTML tags consistently across different browsers?
Mhm. Well, I think it does. It's pretty consistent. Well, actually, I just shared it. We can check how it's working.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Editing together.
Yeah, so I will check this out later. This is very cool. This probably will work for most cases. And it's, well, I guess another thing I should mention here is you probably should be sanitizing the HTML if the medium editor is not, although it might already handle that. So I might look into whether it like strips unknown stuff out of the HTML. Like you, for example, could have a link that has a JavaScript colon some XSS attack thing.
Yeah.
So you would, like, for example, the problem that this would create is like Zeus could try and steal my user session by like using JavaScript in a link. So when I click on the link, he like grabs my cookie and then he like does something with me.
Yeah, that's right.
So I imagine the medium editor might just take care of this for you. Like it's a very like basic problem that you would run into. But if it doesn't, for whatever reason, Google Kaha is a library that is probably the most well-developed that does that if you're going to be storing raw HTML in your database.
Which library?
Google Kaha, C-A-J-A. It's Spanish. I think it's something about heat, but I don't know.
Okay.
What's Kaha mean? Oh, it's a sandbox. It's a box. It means sandbox.
Okay.
In Spanish.
All right.
Also, often mispronounced Kaja because it's Kaha. That's the one thing I can actually do. Being from San Diego is pronounce Spanish words, even if I don't know what they mean.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean that's a very pragmatic, I think, solution to the problem for now, and maybe is probably the best way to use it. The selection thing is interesting. The implementation in text area already takes care of that, but it's for a string. So I guess does the library figure out like how to change your selection, even though it's like in different elements and stuff? Is that kind of like what it takes care of? Like the fact it's in a header?
Well, yeah, there is a library that deals with the selection, omitting the actual tags. It just grabs the text, how is it called? Text content of the DOM element.
Oh, I see.
And like based on this text content, it just figures out what was selected, and it can restore it back. And I coded in different ways that you can change the data around. Like you can, for example, another person can add some data in your selected part, or like cut something. So I'm just handling these things and restoring the selection. So I don't think it's completely like accurate, but it is something that I think it should work pretty good. Well, it's better than just losing the selection.
No, that's a pretty good solution. I think one day we'll have a proper rich text type, and the big advantages there will be that things will transform better against other edits that were simultaneous. We'd have to like play around with this, but my suspicion is that there'll be cases where if people were to make simultaneous edits, you'll just end up with something that, like, the text will kind of make sense, but the HTML structure might get turned into gobbledygook. Where you might just get invalid tags, or you might get like just like literally invalid HTML, like things wrapping things that don't make sense. That's probably what the downside is. But in practice, if two people are editing stuff in real time, it probably will be fine. And if one person is editing, it'll definitely be fine.
Yeah, that's right. So like Yeah, like our use case, I think, how are we going to use it right now is just for administrators, and there are not going to be too many of them. So,
Yeah,
like for this kind of use case, like as an admin page, I think it should be like perfectly fine. But
yeah,
if but if it's going to be used for like with a wide audience, then it's going to crash, definitely.
yeah. I've been like putting off putting rich text in our product because we haven't integrated Stippy properly, which is what we were, or sorry, Quill properly, which is what we were going to use because it's kind of like pretty correct in a lot of things, but obviously I have to do some work to make it work properly with the shared types, which I was actually just talking about in Gitter, so this is very contemporaneous. So yeah, that's like the long-term plan to try and make that work, but it's a bit tricky to store stuff in that type, and then we also need a good way to load data from that type and turn it into HTML statically for various reasons. Like we actually send a lot of emails, both from our product or just like user emails. So I think like then translating that into HTML is a big requirement too. So just storing it into HTML is kind of simple. Maybe we should just do that as an interim, even if it's a little bit wrong.
Yeah, I think there was already some kind of a prototype implementation of a Quill with a shared
I was
text
working
type.
on one at one point, and then Joseph was working with Jason, who wrote Quill, on integrating the type, but we just never really finished. So
Yeah, but I mean, other than that, more recently there was some guy on Gitter who posted a link on his working like a solution
oh, nice.
where he already did some kind of an example project with the Quill using Share.js rich OT type.
Oh,
It should be somewhere in the history.
I will look into that. That's very cool.
That sounds great. I know we've been struggling with this, or not struggling, but we were almost worked around it for doing custom HTML signatures where we started to use like a markdown parser to handle the sanitization for us. But even that presents its own problems because it's still possible to submit script tags and stuff like that unless you set the markdown parser to sanitize it for you.
Or you can make things
Yeah.
that do bad things, or you can make styles that do bad things, because you can also execute JavaScript in CSS. Because that was a good idea. Thank you, Microsoft. I think only in IE, but yes. Cool. Anything else going on?
Made a very small pull request actually right now.
Really quick.
And then I don't know if anybody saw, I made a small plugin for basically handling model-related functionality. I know we discussed that, and we thought a little bit about it internally, and it would be nice to be able to extend the model for a specific collection or a specific item. So, or actually document, I guess is the proper word. And then we also utilized the Razor schema stuff that you guys did, Pavel, and basically just put everything together. It's a very small plugin code-wise, but it makes it a little bit nicer to do coding.
It's awesome. It's just awesome. We already tried it. You just made what we tried to do first. We also were overriding a model. We have our own like internal implementation of something that you did, but you did it in a much better way because you just specify the collection and you specify like it automatically figures out which data model you want to use based on the path that this code model targets. So like if it targets the collection, then it uses the collection like the collection data model. If it targets a document in the collection, it uses this specific data model. So it's great. Thanks very much, Carl.
You're most welcome. Happy to hear you like it. Yeah, we
Yeah,
did
it's
something like
it's
what you did
awesome, really.
in the
Very
beginning,
good.
and then we thought like, yeah, this should not be such a big problem, and it should be pretty easy to just figure it out from the path. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for nice extensions to it as well. And I
Yeah,
mean,
and,
just
and
for
you also thought about the references. You would reference it to find the original path. So even if so, all the nuances are counted. It's so cool.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff though that I mean the references part doesn't work, uh, and yeah, but there is a lot of nice potential there in making it a lot easier to work with, I think.
Okay.
You have any thoughts?
We'll play with this. I mean, this looks kind of like this looks kind of sort of low level enough that if it's a good API idea, I'll kind of think about whether it makes sense to absorb more of this into the core. But yeah, I'll have to read through it a little bit more. Cool.
Yeah.
Um,
I know
with
another thing.
the first thing of passing the root model in, I can see why it's convenient because you often have to play with it a lot, but I'm kind of allergic to adding like lots of parameters to functions that are immediately available on other things. And I don't know. It just makes the API more complicated because like it's harder to document like, oh, this parameter is this kind of model, but this parameter is that kind of model. And that's a bit confusing.
I actually thought a little bit about that. I mean, because typically you always have to deal with two different types of models. Either you have the root model, where you have like your stored data, or you have your components like scope data. And the scope data, I mean, it's called scope or something like that in Angular, I guess. And Knockout would say view model, which is maybe a more appropriate word for it. So maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but or if it's a lot of work, but it would be nice to perhaps.
It's not a lot of work. I mean, obviously you already kind of like did it. It's pretty simple. It's just kind of I don't know, sort of weird to explain to people scopes already.
So that's why you stuck with model.
Also, if you were to rename it like something like scoped, then scoped.root will still be available, which then sounds weird because you're getting the root of a scope, but you're actually getting the entire root of the model, which will just sound weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, actually, the other thing we maybe should do if we're going to do it is one of the things that is important is if you're going to add event listeners, you want to make sure that they're kind of connected to the component so that if the component gets cleaned up, the event listeners get cleaned up. So common pattern that you might need to deal with is like you need to add a event listener on some other collection or some base collection, and whenever stuff gets added to that collection, you might want to do something in your component manually. And like the start function and stuff will take care of this if you call it on in the model that is passed to the component. But if you add it manually, you need to make sure you use like model scope from the components model because it's associated with the component so that basically Kirby knows how to clean up the listeners. So it's still like different than the root. Like the root is literally a reference to the top level, which isn't associated with the component at all. So I actually generally encourage people to use model scope instead of model root inside components for that reason, because it's like easier just to have a rule which is always call scope, and then you don't have to think about it. And
so you do model scope and with like an empty string, for example, to get like on the root path.
Roots, exactly. Or you can just call scope without a parameter. I think it also works. And so you could pass that in. So you could pass in like the model and then model scope with no parameter, which would return a model that is scoped to the root. but has the like component association to it. So like that would be how I would solve that rather than passing in the actual root. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, on the plus side, that's good because it means that you can like access it from, or you're like encouraging people to use that as the basis of things, which is better than them going model root, which they really shouldn't be using to do event listeners. So
again, I guess
that's kind of a thing. I mean, maybe it's better for that reason. I don't even really use the parameters in CoffeeScript at all because you can just say @model, and like that's short enough that I don't even bother passing it in.
Yeah. But then you still have to do @model.root if you need to go to the root, I guess.
Yes, but
That's
if you're gonna make a scope anyway, which you often are, you have to like say @model scope, and that's not really any longer than like your scope model dot @, which is kind of the same thing.
I see. That's true.
It's not that much shorter in practice. We just use .scope a lot, which is just the absolute scope function instead of @, which is the relative scope function.
I see. So that's so then you don't really ever need to go to the root, I guess.
Yeah, we generally avoid using the root in our components.
And you don't ever do like a var root, which points to model.scope.
I do it a lot internal to Racer because inside of Racer, the reason why it references the root constantly is that Racer has like a lot of internal maps of stuff that it uses, and the way that it always finds those maps is by reference to the root. That's why the root reference is available, like as a kind of top level thing, is you can then kind of have model global state, which is nice. We also internally built a thing kind of like your Derby AR thing, but frankly, I don't like it, actually. It's really, really old. So we're planning on rewriting it. I wouldn't publish it because there's some anti-patterns in it, frankly. But that, at the moment, requires us to go to the root, and I think we can probably change that. So we use it for that, but in general, yeah, we don't really use the root reference that much in our like actual component code.
But do you ever use the pattern that I just wrote in chat? Like not like the model.root, but you actually save the root as a scope to empty string pattern and then use it?
Not a lot. I mean, yes, you can. But like literally what you usually want to do is you never want to use the root scope, like almost never. Like how often do you actually want to get all of the data in the model?
That's true.
So usually it's like I want a specific collection, or I want some scope that's whatever, some specific document or something like that. So then you say like model.scope, that path is basically the same thing as model.scope, no parameters, and then .add. So it's like not, and that's actually like, it's not any better or worse from like an efficiency perspective. It's still another child model either way. And it isn't really that much more typing. Like, I guess scope is a longer word, but it's still letters.
If typing speed is your problem, then you have other problems.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't find it that helpful because, I mean, maybe the bigger problem here is I need to be like more explicit in the documentation about this. But generally, what I've been pushing all of our team to do is to say model scope and never use model root and components, just because, like, if you're only going to be getting model root get works fine and actually is faster because you're not making a new object on your way to doing the get, versus model scope, pass in a path, then .get. Obviously, you're like creating an object when you call .scope. It's pretty light. Like you obviously have seen the code because you edited it, but It's slightly more efficient to say .root.get, but we're talking about a micro optimization that won't matter in practice. So I usually just tell people to use.
It's probably a good reason for not adding model.scope as a second parameter anyway.
Yeah, because it's already available, right? You just have model.scope. It's like versus like scope, right?
Yeah.
So,
fair enough. Fair enough.
I'd recommend using that instead. And if you start using that in your code, tell me if for some reason you feel like it's still awkward. But I think that's kind of what I would encourage, because the association for when you do event listeners is actually really important for component cleanup.
I see. Well, that's good. Good argument, actually.
And you only need it if you add a listener, but most people don't really understand that, so I just tell them to use it all the time, which is much easier.
Yeah. You need to help people.
Exactly. Simpler rules are easier to remember. Less things. But yeah, no, I'm glad that you've been experimenting with the like ORME stuff, because that's something I haven't had time to think about. So I'll definitely check that out. It seems like awesome.
Yeah, we're finding some nice patterns. I'm planning on, or we have like an internal playground repository for just like, this is the way we want to structure our apps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And where we are using all our plugins. This one, and then we have the subcomponents library, which we kind of like, and also we have like a Derby load plugin. I think I showed it to Ian anyway, where you just like pass in a full like component constructor and automatically just adds it through app.component and maps the route to the component and view and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think I looked at that, and it's going in a good direction, and I want to do something like that, but I wanted to make it more tied to the package JSON. The nice thing about that is you get semantic versioning for free. We don't have to implement semantic versioning ourselves.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I guess that was it from me.
Cool. Yeah, I'm still in backend land, so you'll see me pop up with some nice changes to the speed of Share.js soon. Probably not until next week because of NodeConf, but moving right along. I've got a bunch of code that's like only checked in locally, which is bad. I need to publish it on a branch.
Just JIT things.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, about time to wrap up, unless anybody has any last questions or anything. Oh, somebody asked on Gitter about the reason for adding or reason for changing document creation to be more restrictive. And so what I changed was you can only create a remote document, which is basically a document in the database, versus being like a local just JavaScript object. Now using add explicitly. Add still does all the other stuff it used to do. So if you like call .add on a path within a document, it works the same way. The only difference is that set now just throws an error if you try and if you do something that would result in creating a document, which I realize is a breaking change. I did it because it's too easy to accidentally write code that creates documents in your database that you did by accident, and it's happened to us many times in production. And there's a few maybe like weird edge cases where you might want to dynamically create documents, but I just don't think it's worth the trouble of accidentally creating documents in your database, which is lame. So we found that always calling add explicitly if you're going to make a document database is just better.
I guess an alternative would be to add like a warning instead of throwing an error. I don't know if you cleaned up a lot of code with removing the add part set.
I mean, it's still an alpha version technically, so semantically, it don't really have to do deprecation warnings.
Wow.
December doesn't consider alpha versions the same. So yes, I could have done a deprecation warnings style release, but frankly, it's an anti-pattern. So use the old alpha version until you update your code. But please update your code because I'm also soon going to start yanking out other things that have been deprecated, like view name equals is going to be is only soon, which I said months ago, but is actually coming soon. And some other, I deprecated some other old syntax. I forget what it was, but
Element and tag.
what was it?
Tag instead of element.
Oh yeah. I changed it to tag, right? And the reason for that is, thank you, Pavel. You know me better than myself. The reason for that was name was a useful name, and people wanted to use it for stuff, and is was a little more unique and short. And then tag was just more consistent with what it actually is, because it actually is a tag, not an element. So, and shorter, once again, going to shorter names. Yay. So in the final release, when I actually do 0.6.0, be doing that, and then we talked about making the route and like the main component easier to interact with by making the main component for the page scoped to _page. So I'm going to try and do that because it seems relatively straightforward and pretty elegant, actually, which I think is a great idea. And then finally separating out the router, which is like I started on but didn't finish, and the component dependencies thing. That's my list. So when that's done, I will mark it 0.6.0. But I've been working on the back end since we've been running into scaling things, which made a lot of progress on. So I think that will be wrapped up in probably another month. And then I'll get back to Derby a little more.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Doing. All right. Later, folks. It's been fun. See you next week.
Yeah, see you.
See you guys.
Bye.